My husband stared right into my eyes and declared, "You're not attractive enough to join me tonight." I didn't push back. I didn't shed a tear. I just gave a nod and stayed behind. Those words kept ringing in my mind long after the door shut with a thud. For a solid minute, I stood before the mirror in the entryway, frozen, just studying my reflection. My makeup was still perfect. The subtle rose lipstick I'd picked went so well with my dress. Nothing loud, just classy. My pearl earrings glimmered faintly under the soft glow of the hall light. I felt like I looked good. Not breathtaking maybe, but polished. Put together. His phrase, "not attractive enough," cut deep, tearing through my effort, my pride, and all the years I'd stood by him. I'd been married to David for 32 years. We'd created a life together. A home filled with books, giggles, and kids. Then one that slowly settled into a predictable rhythm. I thought, perhaps naively, that we were still partners, that after all this time we'd at least earned mutual respect. But standing there in my heels, one strap already sliding down my shoulder, I sensed something had changed. Not abruptly, but gradually, like dust piling up until it blankets everything. David hadn't always been harsh. He wasn't the type to shout. But as his career soared and the pressure to maintain his status grew, he seemed to pull away, as if my presence reminded him of a simpler life he no longer wanted. He rarely raised his voice, never threw things, never stormed out in a rage. But over the years, his compliments dwindled. His gaze no longer lingered. The little gestures, a hand resting on my back, a quick peck on the cheek, faded away, and neither of us noticed exactly when they stopped. I chalked it up to time, to routines, to raising kids. I thought I was being reasonable, practical. I never saw contempt coming. As I kicked off my shoes and grabbed my still unopened clutch, I caught my reflection again. I remember being 29, meeting David at a seminar. He said my eyes sparkled with passion and that I was the sharpest woman there. I could still picture the way he looked at me then, like he'd hit the jackpot. Now his glance made me feel like something he had to explain away. I wandered to the kitchen, the warm scent of pot roast still lingering from the slow cooker I'd set hours ago. It was supposed to be our cozy after-party meal, but now it would sit untouched, like so many of my efforts. I switched it off, the click echoing in the silent house. It was meant to be our cozy after-party meal. Something comforting to share. I tucked it into the fridge, carefully packing away the sides. Every action, covering the garlic mashed potatoes, rinsing the wine glasses, folding the napkins, felt automatic, like I was observing myself play out a night that never happened. At 8:17 p.m. my daughter Sarah texted me. "How was the gala? Did Dad show you off to his new boss?" I stared at her message, unsure how to respond. Not because I lacked words, but because the truth felt too raw, too private, too embarrassing to put into text. I didn't want to turn into a story Sarah felt sorry for. So I typed back, "He went solo." I wasn't up for it. That was the first lie I told, maybe to shield him, maybe to shield myself, I wasn't sure. I poured a glass of water and sank into a chair at the kitchen table. Still in my dress, makeup untouched, earrings swaying gently with each breath. I glanced at the empty chair across from me, David's chair, and wondered when it turned into just another piece of furniture. When had I become something he felt ashamed of? I didn't cry that night. Not then, not when he stumbled in hours later, reeking of whiskey and fancy cologne, tossing his keys onto the counter with a lazy flick. He didn't mention the gala, didn't talk about the speech he gave, the people he met, or the food. He didn't say anyone missed me. He said nothing. He just looked at me, still sitting at the table in the dim light, and asked, "Why are you still up?" I held his gaze for a long moment and said, "No reason." But in that quiet, something stirred inside me. I didn't realize it yet, but that painful silent moment was the start of everything. Before we dive in, let us know in the comments where you're tuning in from. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more heartfelt stories. Before all this, before the cold remarks, the quiet shame, and the heavy silence, things were different. There was warmth. There was joy. And there was love, or at least something I truly believed was love. It's tempting to look back and second-guess every memory, to wonder if it was all in my head. But I cling to what I know was real. Because it meant something. I meant something. And back then I think David believed that too. I was 26 when I met David. I just started teaching English at a high school in Charlotte, and he was a junior account manager at a growing tech company. He came to pitch some new classroom software to the school district. He was magnetic, the kind of guy who seemed to know everyone's name and say it with just the right warmth. When he learned I taught literature, he asked about my favorite book. I told him Pride and Prejudice and he grinned, saying, "So you're into women who stand their ground." That comment made me laugh then. Now it feels like a memory from someone else's life. We fell for each other fast. David always said he didn't need long to know what he wanted. We tied the knot after 13 months. Our wedding wasn't fancy, but it was full of happiness. We swayed under string lights in my parents' backyard, sipped too much budget sparkling wine, and laughed until the stars came out. He'd rest his hand on my lower back whenever we were in a crowd, like he was proud to have me by his side. Those touches, they used to matter. We built a life in a cozy house with chipped paint and a garden that always seemed to sprout more weeds than flowers. But we were content. Or I thought we were. I cooked dinners. He climbed the career ladder. I stayed up late marking essays while he typed up proposals. He'd read bits of my students' papers out loud, chuckling at the quirky parts. I thought we were in it together. We were raising 2 kids, Sarah, now 32, and Noah, 29. They were my whole world, and I thought they were his too. Back then, David brought me to every work party, every event. I was his date, his partner in crime. He'd squeeze my hand under the table, murmur silly jokes in my ear. We'd stumble home late, laughing about the night while brushing our teeth side by side. He'd say things like, "You worked that room better than I ever could," or, "I'm damn lucky you're the brains in this operation." It felt like we were in sync, lifting each other up, respecting each other. Now I look back and wonder if those words were genuine or just what he felt he had to say back then. Did he get tired of keeping up the act? Or did I stop being someone he could admire? When I hit 48, we threw a dinner party for his coworkers. I whipped up herb-crusted chicken and laid out our good wedding china. I slipped into a navy dress David had gifted me for my birthday, and he told me I looked stunning. His hand rested on my hip as we mingled, making me feel noticed, cherished, desired. That glow didn't stick around. Bit by bit, things shifted. His compliments dried up. The invites to his events stopped coming. When I asked why he didn't want me at a certain gala, he'd brush it off with, "You'd be bored," or "It's just work stuff, no big deal." But it was a big deal. It was a part of his world he was slowly locking me out of. First, I didn't push back. I told myself it was okay, that I was worn out anyway. I had books to read, essays to grade, errands to run. I made excuses for him and for myself. Looking back, I see how I let it slide too easily. I didn't challenge the change. I didn't call him out when he started staying out later. I figured if I gave him space, didn't nag or cling, he'd come back to me. That's what people say, right? Love means letting someone breathe. But sometimes, love means spotting when someone's quietly shutting you out and saying something before the door slams in your face. I kept believing we were still a team, that this was just a rough patch, a temporary drift. I didn't see it for what it was. The start of our partnership unraveling and the moment I began fading into the background of a man who'd forgotten what made me shine. But I remembered. Not all at once, not perfectly, but I did. And that's when things started to change. It wasn't some big dramatic scene. No screaming match or vicious insult hurled across the house. The first warning sign was subtle, small, easy to brush off if I'd let myself. But it stuck with me, lodged in my heart, and no matter how I tried to ignore it, it wouldn't leave. It was a client dinner, one of the last I went to with David. His company had just scored a huge account, and the event was at a chic rooftop spot in the city. Think low lights, tailored suits, and the quiet clink of fancy wine glasses. I spent hours getting ready. I wore a rich emerald dress, one David used to say brought out the spark in my eyes. I styled my hair in soft waves and even swung by the mall for a new shade of lipstick. I wanted to look poised, confident, like someone he'd be proud to have on his arm. When we got there, David flipped into work mode like a switch. Smooth, charming, cracking jokes with the younger staff, gripping hands with the big shots. I stayed nearby at first, offering warm smiles, letting him steer the conversations. Then came the moment I'll never shake. We were chatting with a small group, 2 new hires and Laura Bennett, the VP at the time. She was a powerhouse, tall and graceful, with a voice that commanded attention. Someone asked David how long we'd been married, and he let out this breezy, almost flippant laugh saying, "Longer than I can keep track of." The group gave an uneasy chuckle. Then Laura, trying to smooth things over, turned to me and said, "So Ellen, what do you do?" Before I could get a word out, David jumped in. "Oh, she teaches a bit here and there, does some volunteer stuff. You know, keeps herself occupied." And just like that, he pivoted, steering the talk to next quarter's forecasts. I stood there, stunned, my mouth barely parted, just enough to let in the breath I suddenly needed. I'd been teaching for nearly 30 years. I'd led departments, mentored new teachers, helped shape curriculums. But in that moment, I wasn't a professional, I wasn't his equal. I was just some woman filling her days. Laura held my gaze a moment longer than she needed to, and I saw something in her eyes. Maybe pity, maybe understanding. She said, "Well, that's the kind of work that really matters," before getting pulled into another conversation. I was grateful for her kindness, but the sting was already there. I tried to let it go. I kept smiling, nodding along through the night, Even complimented someone's earrings to feel like I belonged. But inside I was coming apart. When we got home I didn't say a word. I wanted to, God, I almost did. But I'd grown up believing that keeping the peace was my role, that a good wife didn't stir conflict. So I swallowed the words, convincing myself it was just one bad night. I stood in the bathroom wiping off my makeup, staring at my reflection, practicing the words in my head. Why did you say that? Why did you make me feel so small? But I stayed quiet. The next morning David acted like it was just another day. He brewed coffee, gave me a quick kiss on the cheek, and strolled out with his briefcase and his confidence untouched. I sat at the kitchen table, a dull ache growing in my chest. That was the moment I knew something had shifted, not just in him but in me. I'd stopped being visible, not just to the world but to the person I trusted most to see me. And worse, I'd started to believe it was okay to fade, to stay silent, to let him write me out of the story he told about our life. But it wasn't okay. That night, that moment of being dismissed, diminished, erased, was the first time I felt the fracture under the surface. It would take more fractures to shatter the foundation, but that was the first. And even though I tried to bury it, I never forgot it. Because that was the night I realized I was slowly becoming invisible in my own marriage. After that rooftop night, something inside me changed. I didn't confront David right away. I convinced myself it wasn't worth a fight, that he probably didn't mean to hurt me. But the pain stuck around, not just in my heart but in the quiet moments that came after. It's odd how the absence of something, attention, warmth, love, can feel louder than any outburst. That's how it began, not with fury or betrayal, but with a slow, steady fading of who I was to him. In the weeks that followed, David grew more distant, though he was still physically there. He'd sit on the couch each night, sip his coffee at the same kitchen counter every morning, but the spark that used to light up his eyes when he saw me was gone. Those little gestures, the ones you don't notice until they're missing, vanished. He stopped asking about my day. If I shared anyway, he'd barely pause to listen. One morning I stood in the kitchen, holding two ties, one dark blue with faint gray pinstripes, the other a bold burgundy. I asked, "Which one for your meeting today?" He didn't glance up from his phone, just muttered, "Does it really matter?" and headed to his study. I stood there, staring at the ties for a long minute before tucking them away. It wasn't about the ties, it never is. He used to come home with a kiss, a quick story, or a joke about his day. Now he'd walk in already on a call and stay that way through dinner. If I tried to talk, he'd hold up a finger. Not rudely, but like I was an assistant interrupting something critical. It was subtle, polished, and crushing. One Sunday, I was folding laundry when he came into the room. I just washed and pressed his dress shirts, sorting them by color like always. I looked up with a smile, hoping he'd notice the effort. He didn't. He just grabbed the remote and flipped on the news. I sat there, clutching a pair of his socks, feeling the sharp pang of being unseen. Our conversations turned into checklists. What time's the electrician coming? Did you book Noah's dental appointment? We need more olive oil. Gone were the cozy, rambling chats about novels, movies, or even the neighbor's new dog. When I tried to revive those moments, mentioning a book I loved or how Sarah's daughter had drawn me as a superhero, he'd nod politely, but his eyes were elsewhere, usually glued to his phone. I started feeling like a stranger in my own home. The house hadn't changed, but it felt colder, emptier. I'd get up early to make his favorite oatmeal with brown sugar and pecans, and he'd grab a granola bar on his way out. I stopped buying pecans. I stopped making oatmeal. I started eating alone. At night, we'd sit on the same couch, but it felt like we were oceans apart. He'd watch basketball or scroll through his phone. I'd knit or flip through a book. Sometimes I'd try to spark something, saying, "That player reminds me of your brother Mike." He'd give a half nod, barely hearing me. One night I asked, "Do you ever miss when we talk for hours about nothing?" He looked at me, puzzled, and said, "We talk all the time, don't we?" That's when it hit me. He didn't even see the gap between us. He wasn't mean. He wasn't mad. That might have been easier to handle. At least then I could have fought back. But how do you fight when someone stops noticing you, when you blend into the furniture, useful, familiar, but just there? Worse, I started believing it. I doubted my appearance, my age, my value. I stopped bothering with makeup. I wore plain sweaters and jeans not because I didn't care, but because it felt like no one else did. I stopped speaking up at family dinners, stopped sharing advice, stopped laughing too loud. It was like every piece of me that used to fill a room was being quietly nudged aside. That's what it feels like to erode emotionally. Not a sudden flood, but a slow drip that carves you out, bit by bit, until you're just a shadow sitting at the edge of your own life. Back then, I didn't see how dangerous that inner silence was. I only knew I was shrinking, and he didn't even notice. There's a unique kind of hurt that comes from quiet humiliation. Not the loud, explosive kind that spills out in a fight, but the soft kind that sneaks up on you, unseen by anyone else. It's the kind that rewrites who you think you are in a matter of seconds. It happened one Friday night, about 18 months after that rooftop dinner, a period where David's late nights and dismissive comments had become routine, slowly chipping away at my confidence. David had just won a top sales award, and his company was throwing a fancy banquet to celebrate at the Hilton downtown. Black tie, gourmet food, speeches, the works. He didn't ask me to come. When I asked why, he gave me a practice line. "It's mostly for the team. Just dull work stuff. You'd hate it." I nodded, acting like it didn't hurt. But Sarah, our daughter, heard about the event through a friend and called me, confused. "You're not going with Dad? It's a big deal for him." I lied, saying I had a sore throat and told him to go solo. But inside I was breaking. I remembered past events, when he'd flash me a proud smile across the room and boast about how I polished his speeches. I missed being part of his world, being introduced as someone who mattered. That night, I made a spur-of-the-moment choice, maybe a foolish one. I didn't want to barge into the banquet or cause a scene. I just wanted to see him. I dressed carefully in a navy silk top and a slate gray skirt I hadn't worn in ages. I styled my hair in loose curls, put on makeup with shaky hands. I wasn't there to challenge him. I just wanted to feel for a moment like I belonged in a room where people knew my name. I got to the hotel early and lingered in the hallway near the ballroom. I didn't go inside. I stood by a tall vase of fake lilies, clutching a purse I didn't need, pretending to check my phone. I spotted him before he saw me. He was near the entrance, chuckling with two younger guys in sharp suits, looking confident, put together. Then his boss, Laura Bennett, walked up. I overheard her say, "Is Ellen joining us?" I was hoping to catch up with her. "It's been forever." David gave a tight smile and said, "Nah, she's not really into these things anymore. You know how women are." His tone was light, casual, like he was brushing off a minor annoyance. Laura's expression stiffened. She nodded slowly and turned to talk to someone else. My throat tightened. You know how women are. My ears burned, my pulse racing. That wasn't just a fib. It was a jab, a way to shrink me down. I wasn't homesick with a fever. I hadn't chosen to skip those events, I'd been nudged out, and now he was spinning it like I was the issue, like I'd withered while he soared, like I was too delicate, too fussy, too much of a liability to be by his side. I turned to go, my hands trembling as I stepped into the chilly night air. I made it to the parking garage and slumped in my car, my forehead pressed against the steering wheel. I didn't cry right away, I was too shocked. I couldn't tell what stung more. The lie itself or how effortlessly he told it. How at ease he was twisting the truth in front of people who used to value me. When the tears finally came, they were soft and silent. I felt humiliated. Not because the world had laughed at me, but because the man I'd stood by for decades had wiped me out of his story with a casual grin. When I got home, I headed straight to the bathroom and wiped off my makeup. I stared at my reflection in the mirror. Same face he once called dazzling, same eyes, same smile, just dulled now, not by years but by weariness. I whispered to myself, "You are not invisible." But the words felt hollow, like I was trying to convince someone who wasn't there. That night something broke. Not with a crash like a slammed door or shattered glass, but a quiet shift deep inside. A crack in the foundation of how I saw him, and maybe for the first time how I saw myself. After that banquet moment, something in me toughened. I didn't yell. I didn't confront David when he strolled in late, humming lightly, setting his award on the fireplace without a word about the evening. He glanced at me on the couch, flashed a faint smile and said, "Rough night. You wouldn't have liked it." I nodded, my voice flat. I doubt he caught the change in my tone, or if he did, he didn't care. I wish I could say I grabbed a bag and stormed out, all fire and drama, but that's not how it works. When you've woven your life around someone, shared a home, routines, calendars, family, you don't just walk away. You start fading bit by bit from the life you helped build. First, I just stopped asking. I quit asking about his work parties. I stopped offering to help with his projects. I stopped checking in. I still cooked, cleaned, paid bills, and sent birthday cards. But emotionally, I pulled back. David hardly seemed to notice. If he did, he probably chalked it up to me slowing down with age, settling into some quiet, retired version of myself. But I was mourning the marriage I thought we had, mourning the woman I used to be when I felt loved, needed, seen. I started sleeping in the spare room, blaming it on an achy back from our old mattress. He didn't argue. "I like the extra space anyway," he said. Truth is, I couldn't stand lying next to someone who once cherished me and now barely glanced my way. There was no closeness left, not even the kind that comes from years of habit. Sarah picked up on it. At a Sunday brunch, she leaned close and murmured, "Mom, you doing okay?" I gave her a tight smile and said, "Just worn out." It was true, but not the way she thought. I was exhausted from clawing for a place in his world, from proving my worth just to feel noticed, from hoping he'd see I was slipping away. One night, after cleaning the kitchen by myself again, I pulled out an old photo album, its pages yellowed and corners curled. I flipped through pictures of us hiking in the Blue Ridge Mountains, dancing barefoot in our living room, posing with the kids in goofy Halloween costumes. In every shot, David's hand was on my shoulder or waist, his grin wide, mine even wider. I lingered on a photo from Paris 18 years ago. He was kissing my cheek while I laughed, holding a croissant like a prize. I whispered to that woman, "Where'd you go?" But I knew. She didn't leave. She faded. The next morning, I grabbed a blank notebook and started writing. Nothing big, just small things. Memories, frustrations, lines from books I loved, names of people who made me feel like I mattered. For the first time in years, I wrote for me, not to-do lists or reminders, but thoughts that were mine alone. It wasn't a strategy, not yet, but it was a start. David didn't notice the notebook. He didn't ask why I spent more time on the porch or why I started wearing my favorite hoop earrings again. He didn't wonder why I took long walks and came back quieter but somehow steadier. Then one evening, we got invited to a neighborhood potluck. Nothing fancy, just a cozy gathering with couples we'd known forever. I told David I wasn't going. He looked surprised. "You never miss these." "Not anymore," I said. He raised an eyebrow. "Why not?" "I'm tired of sitting with people who ask about your job, while acting like they don't remember I used to be someone too." He didn't reply, just blinked and said, "Do what you want." So I stayed home. I lit a candle, poured a glass of red wine, and played the old Ella Fitzgerald records we used to spin together. I sat at the table, not in sorrow but in calm. For the first time in years, the quiet didn't feel like a punishment. It felt like room to breathe. Everyone probably thought I was finished, that I'd faded into the background for good, just going through the motions. But something inside me, something I thought was long gone, was stirring. I wasn't done. I wasn't shattered. I wasn't even angry. I was waiting. And in that waiting, something strong was waking up. Rock bottom didn't hit like a thunderclap. It crept in softly, like mist settling over a field, slow, disorienting, and so subtle you don't notice it's everywhere until it is. It wasn't a meltdown, no shouting or smashed dishes or bags packed in a huff. It was a moment of absolute stillness when I realized I'd lost myself. And he didn't even see it. It was a Tuesday afternoon in early November. The air sharp, leaves crackling under my shoes as I wandered through our neighborhood, trying to feel something, anything. I'd started taking long walks, not for exercise but for escape. I needed to move, to get out of that house, away from walls that once rang with laughter but now just echoed silence. That day, I walked farther than I usually did. I didn't keep track of time. I left my phone at home. Somehow, I ended up at a little park on the outskirts of town. There was a weathered bench by a pond, its paint chipped and faded. I sat down, watching a couple of ducks drift across the water, and out of nowhere, tears started falling. Not a wail, not even a sniffle, just quiet tears rolling down my face. I didn't know what set them off. Maybe it was the stillness. Maybe it was the calm. Or maybe it was realizing that this park, this fleeting moment, made me feel more noticed than I had in years. No one here expected anything from me. No one glanced at me like I was fading or brushed me off with a polite smile. I was just there, and somehow that felt warmer than anything in my own house. The worst part wasn't feeling alone. It was knowing I felt lonelier sitting across from my husband every day than I did on that bench with strangers passing by. That was when I knew I'd hit rock bottom. Not because I was shattered, but because I no longer recognized the life I'd spent decades shaping. When I got home, the house felt colder, not in temperature but in spirit. It was David's day off, and he was in his study as usual on a video call. I lingered in the doorway for a moment, watching him. He didn't look up. He didn't pause. He didn't even hear me come in. I stood there like a shadow, and he never noticed. That evening I made dinner, lemon herb chicken, his favorite. I'm not sure why. Maybe I hoped he'd remember something, take a bite and say, "You made this when we were newlyweds." But he didn't. He ate distractedly, scrolling on his phone between bites. When I asked how it tasted, he mumbled, "It's good," and went back to whatever he was reading. That was the night I stopped setting two places at the table. After dinner, I sat in the living room trying to read a book I couldn't focus on. David flipped on the news, the volume blaring. I asked him to turn it down. He did barely, then muttered, "You've been so touchy lately." I looked at him, really looked at him, and said, "I'm not touchy. I'm sinkin'." He blinked. "What?" "Nothing," I said, and I meant it. Explaining yourself to someone who's already tuned you out is like shouting into a void and expecting it to shout back. Later that night, I went to the bathroom and stared at my reflection. Not to fix my hair or put on moisturizer, just to see myself. My eyes looked weary, my skin lacked its old glow. And there were faint lines around my lips I hadn't noticed before. I didn't feel old, I felt erased. I ran my fingers through my hair and whispered, "Is this all there is?" I turned off the light, sat on the edge of the bathtub in the dark and just breathed. For almost an hour, no thoughts, no plans, just me and the faint hum of a house that no longer felt like home. Rock bottom wasn't a meltdown, it was acceptance. The moment I realized that waiting for him to see me, to love me, to choose me again was draining the life out of me. That night, I didn't make a grand decision. I didn't swear to get even or reinvent myself. I just faced the truth. I was gone and no one had noticed. But buried beneath the sorrow, the resignation, the grief, something small flickered. A spark I hadn't felt in years. It was faint, delicate, but it was mine. And that meant I wasn't finished. Sometimes the tiniest things carry the most weight. Not because they're loud or flashy, but because they cast a soft light on everything you've been avoiding. It happened while I was sorting through the spare room closet. I'd been keeping busy, filling my days with small tasks to make the silence less stifling. The closet was a wreck, crammed with old boxes, luggage, and dusty files. I had no real reason to tackle it, but that's what rock bottom does. It makes you crave control over something, even if it's just rearranging old sweaters. I found the envelope in a file box labeled David Work Dash. It was tucked between some tax documents and a folder of outdated contracts. A plain white envelope unsealed with David and Ellen written in familiar handwriting. I paused. My name hadn't been next to his in ages, not in any meaningful way. I slid out the paper, unfolding it carefully. Laura had always been kind, someone who remembered names and noticed details. Over the years, we chatted at company events, bonding over books and teaching, though David rarely brought me along anymore. It was a handwritten letter, dated 5 years ago, from Laura Bennett. I knew her signature instantly. She was his boss, the one who'd asked about me at the banquet, the one he'd dismissed with, "You know how women are." I read it slowly. "David, I wanted to thank you again for your stellar presentation last Thursday. Several clients commented on how clear and compelling it was, a true reflection of sharp communication and careful editing. I know Ellen played a key role in refining it, and it made a difference. Please pass along my thanks to her. She's a real asset, not just to you but to our entire team. I hope to see her at the next event. Best, Laura." I read it again, then a third time. My hands shook. Not from anger, but from a rush of something I hadn't felt in forever, validation. I'd helped him craft that speech. I remembered that night so clearly. He was frustrated, the ideas weren't clicking, and his closing felt flat. I sat with him at the kitchen table for hours, tweaking every line, sharpening the story. He gave the speech that week, barely mentioning me when he got home, just saying, "It went okay." But Laura had seen it. She knew. She saw me. It was the first time in years I held proof, written proof, that I still had worth, not just as a wife or a homemaker or a fading figure in the background, but as a partner, a collaborator, a woman with talent and a voice. And David had stuffed that proof in a closet. I sat on the floor, clutching the letter to my chest. I wasn't angry yet. I wasn't even shocked. I was gutted by how easily he tossed aside something that meant the world to me. He could have shared it with me, could have said, "Thank you, Laura noticed your work, you're important." But he didn't. He buried it in a box like it was nothing. Maybe because to him it was, or maybe because admitting it would mean owning how much I'd lifted him up, how much he relied on the woman he was now trying to erase. I set the letter on the bed and stared at it for ages, thinking of all the ways he'd diminished me, all the times he'd basked in the glow of spotlights I helped light. Work, speeches, our family, our home, our life. I'd done more than edit his presentations. I'd smoothed his rough edges, covered his stumbles, helped him shine. And now, here it was in black and white. Proof I didn't need, but damn, it felt good to hold. That night, I didn't tell him I'd found it. I didn't leave it out for him to stumble across. I slipped it back into the envelope and tucked it into my own desk drawer. Not as a weapon, but as a reminder. Not for him, but for me. It marked a shift, not because it changed how he acted, but because it changed how I saw myself. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't overreacting. I wasn't imagining the erasure. I'd been invisible in his version of the story, but not in reality. With that truth, the part of me that had flickered faintly in the shadows, the part one thought was lost, started to glow a little stronger. I wasn't just recalling who I'd been. I was starting to see who I still was. It wasn't instant. There was no dramatic epiphany, no movie moment speech in front of the mirror. But something in me was waking up, slow and steady, like the first light creeping in after a long, dark night. That letter from Laura did more than remind me of my past worth. It stirred something buried, a version of me that had gone quiet but never disappeared. I started small. I began brewing my coffee the way I liked it again, bold black, with a pinch of nutmeg. For years, I'd made it David's way, with cream and a teaspoon of sugar. But one morning, without overthinking it, I poured my cup my way and took it to the porch. Wrapped in a cozy shawl, I sipped slowly, savoring the deep, warm bite. It felt like a small ceremony, a reclaiming of something just for me. That same week, I hauled a box of old journals down from the attic, stacks of them, from spiral notebooks to fancy leather diaries, even loose pages stuffed in folders. I used to write constantly, thoughts, stories, bits of poetry. Somewhere between raising kids and keeping a marriage afloat, I'd stopped. I told myself I was too busy, that my words didn't matter anymore. But they did, and I needed to remember why. I picked up a faded green journal with worn corners and started reading. My younger self was fierce, witty, bold. I had opinions, humor, fire, dreams. I underlined lines, jotted down aspirations I'd let slip away. She was still there, waiting for me in those inked pages. That night, I opened a new notebook and wrote 3 simple lines. I've given too much and asked for too little. I am not shattered. I am still here. It wasn't earth-shattering, but it was true, and it was a start. I started dressing for myself again. Not for David, not for anyone else, just for me. On a whim, I bought a deep teal scarf, the kind I used to wear when I taught, and draped it around my neck just to run to the grocery store. I picked out a new lipstick, a warm berry shade. When I caught my reflection in a shop window, I didn't flinch or look away. I stopped, looked, and saw myself. My old friend Lisa called that weekend. We hadn't talked in over a year. Life, kids, chaos always get in the way. But that day, I answered, and we talked for nearly 3 hours, laughing about old memories and grieving the things that still hurt. I shared a bit about what was going on. Not the whole story, but enough. She listened, and when I said, I think I lost who I was, she said, no, honey, you just stopped listening to yourself. That hit hard. I started taking quiet steps forward. I rearranged my bookshelf, pulling out the books I adored. Pride and Prejudice dash. Their eyes were watching God dash. Mrs. Dalloway dash. Each one felt like a reflection of me. I signed up for a free writing class at the community center. Just 8 women, and a teacher who talked too fast, but had a smile that lit up the room. I didn't tell David. I figured he wouldn't ask where I was going anyway. Every small choice, the coffee, the scarf, the pen in my hand, felt like a statement. I wasn't plotting a revolution or mapping out a grand plan. I was waking up slowly but fully. I stopped waiting for his approval, stopped searching his face for a flicker of recognition or praise. Instead, I started watching my own face, noticing when it brightened, when it softened, when it felt alive. David noticed the little changes on the surface. You've been out a lot lately, he said one morning, grabbing his keys. I have, I said, offering nothing more. He looked at me a second longer than usual, not with interest but with a kind of puzzled frown, like he didn't know what to make of me. I didn't give him answers, because this wasn't about him anymore. It was mine. My awakening wasn't loud or showy. It wasn't for anyone else to witness or understand. It was quiet, steady, deeply personal, like turning the soil before planting a garden. The kind of change that takes root and can't be undone. I wasn't asking who I was anymore. I was remembering, and that memory, that slow, certain truth of myself, was stronger than anything he'd ever tried to erase. After my awakening, I didn't make a big announcement. There were no ultimatums, no drawn-out fights. I didn't slam doors or hurl accusations. That would have been too easy for David to brush off as me being hysterical or over-emotional. No, this was quiet, deliberate. I didn't need to be loud. I just needed to be deliberate. It began with my daily routine. I reshaped it bit by bit, so it no longer orbited around him. I started waking up earlier, not to cater to his schedule, but to claim time for myself. I stopped holding off on dinner until David got home. I cooked what I craved, not what he liked best. If he asked why I wasn't eating with him, I'd say, I ate earlier. Calm and matter of fact. No need for excuses or apologies. I turned my attention to organizing my documents, bank statements, tax records, insurance policies, all the paperwork we'd piled up over the years. It hit me, with a pang in my gut, how little I'd been involved in our finances since I stopped teaching. David had taken charge, whether by habit or intent, I wasn't sure. But it left me feeling exposed, like I'd handed over too much trust without a second thought. So I educated myself quietly. I opened a personal checking account in my name, and redirected the modest pension checks I still got. I transferred my parents' old cabin by the lake, still in my name since they passed, into a living trust, with me as the sole beneficiary. That cabin was my sanctuary, and I was determined to keep it safe. Every move I made was about taking back control. This wasn't about getting even, it was about owning my life again. I'd spent too long reacting to David's actions. Now I was bracing myself for whatever lay ahead. Whether that meant separation, independence, or just the peace of knowing I could stand on my own. I also started working again, not full-time or back in a classroom, but in a way that sparked joy. I offered editing services for college essays and small business websites. Lisa helped me set up a simple online profile, and word got around fast. I had 4 clients in just 10 days. The money wasn't huge, but it reminded me I had worth beyond the 4 walls of our house. David noticed I was busier, saw me stepping out in my nicer clothes more often. One morning he commented, "You're dressing up a lot these days." I met his eyes and said, "I'm dressing for myself." He arched an eyebrow but didn't push. Maybe he sensed the answer to any question he asked wouldn't be one he was ready for. I stopped sharing details unprompted. If he asked about my day, I'd give short, polite responses. If he didn't ask, I kept quiet. The silence between us used to feel heavy, suffocating. Now I let it sit. It gave me room to breathe. Around then, I took down the framed wedding photo from the fireplace and swapped it for a picture of Sarah and Noah as kids, barefoot by the lake at my parents' old cabin. When David noticed, he paused and asked, "Where's the wedding picture?" "In the closet," I said. He didn't ask why, didn't try to put it back. It was a small change, but it meant something. Our wedding, once the heart of our shared story, wasn't something I wanted on display anymore. Not for guests to see, not for me to face every day. The more I carved out my own space, the clearer my thoughts became. I stopped obsessing over how to mend us. I quit asking, "What's wrong with me?" and started asking, "What do I need to feel whole?" In that quiet rebuilding, I rediscovered my own strength. I used to think strength meant being loud, demanding to be heard, fighting to be seen. But now I saw a different kind of power. One that moves in silence, that doesn't plead or shout but simply acts steady and sure. Every account I opened, every paper I organized, every choice I made without him, it was all building toward freedom, toward clarity, toward the moment I could stand tall and say, "I'm ready." And the truth was, I wasn't gearing up to leave David, I was gearing up to return to myself. No fanfare, no grand gesture, just quiet steps toward the woman I'd almost forgotten I could be. Power doesn't always shift with a bang. Sometimes it changes hands in the quiet, in moments no one's watching. That's how it happened in our house. While David went on with his emails, his meetings, his phone calls, I was moving too silently, purposefully. And without him realizing, the balance between us started to shift. It began with how I carried myself. Not the way I used to show up for him, but how I started showing up for me. I moved through the house with a new ease. My shoulders were straighter. I made choices without checking with him. I wore vibrant colors I hadn't touched in years. Deep reds, bright blues that turned heads. I stopped asking if my plans fit his schedule and started setting my own. David noticed. First he seemed thrown off. He'd ask where I was headed and I'd say, "Out." Not sharp, just simple. I didn't know him a rundown anymore. He'd blink, a little startled, but he didn't press. Maybe he didn't care. Or maybe he was starting to sense something had changed. That flicker of uncertainty in him, that was new. Sarah started coming by more often. She called every week now, not out of duty but because she wanted to. She said I sounded different. Lighter. That word caught me off guard, lighter. Like I'd been lugging something so heavy for so long that my voice had lost its lift. But she was right. I was lighter, not because my troubles were gone, but because I'd stopped pretending to be someone else just to keep David comfortable. One afternoon she brought her son, my grandson Liam, over. We baked chocolate chip cookies together, just the 2 of us, while David stayed holed up in his study. When Sarah saw us giggling in the kitchen, she grinned and said, "You look so alive, Mom." I hadn't realized how long it had been since anyone saw me that way. Even Noah called more. Our talks were brief, sometimes a bit stiff. He's quieter than Sarah. But he started asking questions that made me pause. "Are you happy, Mom?" Noah asked me once. I told him, "I'm figuring it out." And I meant every word. Beyond our family, things started shifting in small ways too. At the writing workshop, the instructor asked me to share a piece I'd written. A short essay about lost dreams and finding clarity in midlife. I read it aloud, my voice steady. When I finished, the room went quiet for a moment, then burst into applause, real heartfelt applause, not just polite claps. Later, one of the women, Claire, came up to me and said, "You should send that to a magazine or something." I smiled and said, "Maybe I will." And for the first time in years, I wasn't just brushing it off, I meant it. Even the way I carried myself became a quiet act of strength. One evening, I came downstairs in a deep green coat I hadn't worn since my teaching days. It still fit like a glove. David looked up from his phone and said, "You look different." "I feel different," I replied, leaving it at that. He started noticing the changes, the way I didn't stick to our old routines, how I stopped reminding him to pick up his dry cleaning, how I didn't chuckle at his half-hearted dinner table jokes. One morning, he asked if I could help with a work presentation. I gave him a soft but firm smile and said, "I don't do that anymore." He blinked, thrown off. "But you always help with those." "Exactly," I said. "I always did." I didn't need to spell it out. The weight of those words hung between us like a storm cloud. That's when the shift in power became undeniable. When he started feeling the absence of the woman he'd taken for granted. Not because I was trying to hurt him, but because I was done pouring myself into someone who took without giving back. One night at dinner, he asked, "Is something up with you?" I looked at him, calm and steady. "Yes, with me." He waited, clearly expecting me to elaborate. I didn't. I had nothing to prove. He was no longer the axis of my world, and I think that's when he finally sensed it. The power wasn't in a big fight, it was in my clarity, in the way I claimed my space, made my choices, and took up room again. I didn't yell. I didn't beg. I didn't ask for his permission to grow, I just grew. And that quiet, unshakable shift made him uneasy, not because I was walking away, but because he realized I didn't need to stay. The confrontation wasn't loud. No dishes were smashed, no insults were slung, no doors slammed in a huff. It was subtler, and that made it stronger. It was just for me, not a performance for anyone else. It started with an invitation. A cream-colored envelope slipped under the door one Wednesday morning by a courier in a gray jacket. David was already at work. The return address bore his company's logo in crisp gold lettering. I opened it carefully. Inside was a handwritten note on thick, elegant stationery. "Dear Mrs. Harper, we'd be delighted if you could join us at this year's Leadership Recognition Dinner. Your past contributions and support have not gone unnoticed, and we'd love the chance to thank you in person. Warm regards, Laura Bennett, Chief Operating Officer." I stared at the words, my fingers gripping the paper's edges. For a moment I felt lightheaded, not from surprise but from being seen. After years of being erased, someone had remembered me, deliberately and publicly. Laura Bennett, the same woman David had brushed off with "you know how women are." The same woman who recognized my worth, not as an accessory but as a partner in his success. I RSVP'd yes that same morning. I didn't mention it to David. Part of me wondered if he'd even notice me there, or if he'd be too caught up in his world to care. Either way, I was done waiting for his permission to show up. The dinner was a week later, held at a sleek venue with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the bay. It was black tie. I chose a fitted deep burgundy dress with a soft silk neckline and delicate gold earrings. Lisa came over to help with my hair. Loose curls swept back just enough to highlight my face. When I looked in the mirror, I didn't see someone trying to impress. I saw a woman stepping back into her own skin. David hadn't brought up the dinner. Either he assumed I wasn't invited or didn't care to check. That evening, when he got home from work, I was already dressed. He stopped short in the bedroom doorway. "You going somewhere?" I smiled. "Yes, the leadership dinner." His brow creased. "You got an invitation?" "I did, from Laura." I turned, fastening a bracelet. "She wanted to thank me in person." He stood there, silent a beat too long, like he was scrambling for words, maybe excuses. I didn't give him the chance to find them. "I'll see you there," I said, and walked out the door. The venue hummed with the clink of glasses and the murmur of a jazz quartet. I arrived alone but didn't feel alone. People I hadn't seen in years greeted me with warm, genuine smiles. Laura spotted me near the entrance and her face lit up. "Ellen," she said, stepping forward to pull me into a hug. "You look incredible. I'm so glad you made it." "Thank you," I said. "I'm happy to be here." She led me to a table near the front. Not the usual back corner for spouses, but one reserved for key players. My name was on a place card right next to hers. When David arrived 15 minutes later, he saw me before I saw him. I felt his eyes land on me, then on the place card, then on Laura laughing beside me. He approached slowly, hesitant, like he'd walked into a game where the rules had shifted. "Ellen," he said, forcing a half smile. "I didn't know you'd be here." "I was invited," I said, turning to him with calm confidence. "Personally." Laura placed a hand on David's arm. "You never told me how talented your wife is, David. I still think about that presentation you gave 5 years ago, the one she helped shape. You should have brought her to more of these. You missed out." He mumbled something, maybe a weak joke, but it fell flat. Her words hit like a beacon. illuminating the truth. He hadn't just left me behind, he'd pushed me out. And now everyone could see it. I didn't gloat or smirk. I just looked at him with the kind of quiet strength that comes when you no longer need someone else's validation to stand tall. We sat through the dinner, and I dove into vibrant conversations, laughing, sharing ideas, even swapping business cards with a woman who ran a local charity. She leaned in and said, "We could use someone like you." When the night wrapped up, David offered to walk me to my car. I waved him off. "I drove myself," I said. That was the confrontation. No yelling, no pointing fingers, just pure, unapologetic presence. For the first time in years, I stood fully in my own strength, not as his wife, not as a woman who'd been sidelined, but as myself. And he saw it, every bit of it, too late. After that dinner, something in David changed, or maybe it was just his grip on control that started to slip. I could sense it in how he lingered in the kitchen more, asking questions he'd never bothered with before. "Where are you headed? Who was that calling? Need any help?" But regret doesn't undo what's already been done, and the version of me he was scrambling to reconnect with was long gone. The final justice didn't come with courtroom battles or petty vengeance. It arrived in something far more elegant, truth spoken plainly, in front of the one person he never expected. 2 weeks after the dinner, Laura called me personally. "Ellen," she said, "I know this might seem sudden, but would you consider speaking at our Women in Leadership brunch next month? The theme is hidden impact, and honestly, your story fits that better than anyone I can think of." I paused, soaking in the irony. I thought back to all those years I'd spent in the shadows, believing my role was to lift him up while I disappeared. Now here I was, about to step into a spotlight of my own. Was I ready? I wasn't sure, but I was done hiding. I'd once been the woman tucked quietly at the back of David's events, overlooked or dismissed, and now I was being asked to take center stage, not as a guest but as the main voice. "Yes," I said simply. "I'd love to." I didn't tell David. I let the day sneak up on him. The brunch was held at a chic downtown venue, packed with professionals, executives, and local leaders. Laura introduced me with genuine warmth, highlighting my years as an educator, my behind-the-scenes contributions, and the quiet resilience that women like me often carry unnoticed. I stepped up to the podium, my heart calm and steady. I wasn't nervous. I wasn't there to dazzle or prove anything. I was there to speak my truth. "My name is Ellen Harper," I began. And for years I thought supporting someone meant staying invisible, that loving someone meant stepping back so they could shine. For a while I was proud of that. I saw David seated near the back, his eyes fixed on me. I went on, but then I learned something. Support doesn't mean silence. Partnership isn't about fading away. It's about growing together, being seen for what you bring. I'd spent years helping someone build their career, refine their words, steer their success, all while slowly vanishing from my own story. Heads nodded around the room. A few women exchanged knowing glances. "I was never angry about it," I said. "But I was exhausted. Exhausted from being written out of a story I helped create." I paused, then looked straight at the audience and at David. It wasn't until someone from his world saw me, valued me, and said it out loud that I started remembering who I was. That's the power of being seen. And that's what I want every woman here to know. You don't have to disappear to be loyal. You don't have to shrink to love someone. And you don't need anyone's permission to matter. The applause was deep, not loud or showy, but rich with something heavier than praise, connection, understanding. Afterward, several women came up to me, thanking me, some sharing their own stories with quiet tears. Then David approached, looking unsteady, a rare sight. He held my gaze and said, "You didn't tell me you were speaking today." "No," I said, "I didn't." He opened his mouth, but I stepped past him. I didn't need his approval or his reaction. The justice had already been served. Not through him, not through a fight, but through truth being spoken, heard, and believed by people who mattered. A few days later, I got a letter from Laura. "Ellen, your words shifted the room. Thank you for showing us that strength doesn't always shout. Sometimes it's just real. We'd love for you to join our mentorship program this year. Let's talk soon. Warmly, Laura." Like the first letter, this one went into my desk drawer, but this time I didn't keep it hidden. I framed it. The final justice wasn't about punishment. It was a reward, earned, deserved, and unquestionably mine. My speech at the brunch sparked a ripple I hadn't seen coming, not just in David but in others around me. People who'd been distant or silent started reaching out, like they were seeing me clearly for the first time. But I wasn't chasing their attention anymore. I wanted their honesty, and for once, they brought it. Sarah called that weekend, her voice carrying a weight beyond our usual chats. "Mom," she said, "can we talk in person?" When she showed up the next afternoon, she had an old photo album. One I hadn't seen in ages, probably pulled from the attic. We sat on the back deck, the autumn air cool and sharp, as she set the album between us and flipped to pages of birthday parties, Christmas mornings and lazy weekends on the couch. "I've been thinking," she said softly, "about everything you've done for us, for Dad, for everyone." I stayed quiet, letting her go on. "I think I didn't want to see it. I thought you were fine because you always seemed fine. Now I realize you weren't. You were just quiet." I nodded. Sometimes that's what moms do. We make quiet look easy. She reached for my hand, her eyes brimming. "I'm sorry, Mom, for not asking, for not seeing." I gave her a small smile. "You were busy growing up. I was busy fading away." She shook her head. "I want to know you now, the real you. Not just the woman who kept everything together." That moment, her reaching across the divide with love and humility, meant more than any applause or public nod. It was healing, not because I needed her to fix the past, but because she was seeing me, not just the role I'd played. Even Noah texted that night, just 2 words, "Proud, Mom." That was enough. As for David, he tried reaching out a few days later. His attempt was hesitant, almost clumsy, but it was clearly a try. "I've been thinking," David started, standing stiffly in the kitchen as I trimmed stems for a vase of daisies from my garden. "About everything, how I've treated you, how I've acted." I didn't respond, letting the silence carry the weight. "I was wrong," he said. "I didn't see what you were going through. I took you for granted." I looked up at him. "Yes, you did." He paused, searching my face. "Is it too late?" I held his gaze. "Too late for what? An apology?" "No. For going back to who we used to be?" "Maybe." He looked away, his shoulders slumping. "I just want to be part of your life again." I gave a soft shrug. "Then you'll have to find a new way to be in it, because I'm not going back." That was the difference. I wasn't bitter or angry. I was clear. I didn't need his guilt to affirm my worth. I didn't need a big cinematic reunion. I'd reconnected. Not just with the people I loved, but with myself. Some endings aren't loud. They don't come with swelling music or grand speeches. They're quiet, like closing a book, and just as final. A few weeks after the brunch, I went back to that little park bench where I'd once sat, tears streaming, wondering if anyone would ever see me again. This time I brought a notebook and a thermos of nutmeg spiced coffee. I watched the ducks gliding across the pond, the same ones I'd cried in front of, and smiled. Not because life was perfect, but because I'd come through something that once made me feel invisible. I opened my notebook and reread the words I'd written months ago. "I've given too much and asked for too little. I am not broken. I am still here." That last line hit me like a heartbeat. I am still here. Not the woman who stood frozen in front of a hallway mirror, hearing her husband say she wasn't attractive enough. Not the woman who smiled through dinner parties while being erased. Not the one who waited for someone else to hand her worth. No, I was someone new, someone forged from those very cracks. I'd found purpose again through my writing, my speaking, and mentoring younger women who reminded me so much of my younger self. I'd built something beyond marriage, beyond motherhood, something that was mine alone. The framed letter from Laura hung above my desk now, not as a prize but as a milestone, a line between who I'd been and who I'd become. David was still in the house. We lived together, not with coldness but with distance. He'd started to shift in small ways, listening more, asking instead of assuming, saying thank you, but it wasn't about him anymore. I didn't need him to change for me to feel complete. That was never the answer. My story didn't end with divorce or vengeance. It ended with reclamation, the quiet kind, the kind that doesn't need a spotlight, the kind that grows slowly until one day you wake up and realize you didn't just survive. You came back to life. And if there's one thing I've learned, it's this. Sometimes the people closest to you stop seeing you, not because you've changed, but because they've stopped looking. But that doesn't mean you've vanished. It just means it's time to open your own eyes, turn on your own light, and see yourself again. That reflection, that quiet rediscovery, it wasn't just enough. It was everything. If you like this story, please don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel. What do you think? Did Ellen do the right thing or should she have done something different? Write in the comments. We also recommend that you listen to the story of a woman named Marjorie, who is facing humiliation and financial fraud from her daughter-in-law and son, so she blocked all their accounts. To watch this story, just click on the left box on the screen. Have a great time watching.